historical part, and then we're going to move on at the end of the message, and we're going to talk about how it applies to us, and how the story of Ruth and Boaz, again, is such a great, incredible picture of what Jesus did for us. I've read a story about Winston Churchill, and it says that the story says that a gathering of friends at an English estate nearly turned to tragedy when one of the children strayed into deep water. The gardener heard the cries. He plunged in, and he rescued the drowning child, whose name was Winston Churchill. His grateful parents asked the gardener what they could do to reward him. The gardener hesitated, and then he said, "I wish my son could go to college someday and become a doctor." Churchill's parents promised, "We'll see to it." Years later, while Sir Winston Churchill was Prime Minister of England, he was stricken with pneumonia. The country's best physician was summoned. His name was Dr. Alexander Fleming, the man who discovered and developed penicillin. He was also the son of that gardener. Later, Churchill remarked, "Rarely has one man owed his life twice to the same person." But today we're going to read about Boaz, and in some ways we can say that the same thing applies here. That Ruth owed her life right then to Boaz, but she also, because of what came from the union, from their marriage, what ultimately comes from it, we all owe our life to. Let me read for you Ruth chapter 4. We're going to start with the first 4 verses here. And I encourage you to just take your Bible and just to hold it out and keep coming back to it. It says, "Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as a guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, 'Come over here, my friend, and sit down.' So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, 'Sit here.' And they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, 'Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line.'" And we talked last week about the fact that we went through very briefly the story. Ruth's father-in-law lived in Bethlehem. There was a famine. They went to Moab, moved to Moab with his wife and his 2 sons. They get to Moab. The 2 boys marry 2 Moabite women. Ruth is one of those. The 2 boys die. The dad dies. Eventually, the famine in Israel is over. They come back. So now Ruth and Naomi, her mother-in-law, have come back to Israel. They are there. She goes out because she needs to be able to have food. So they go out and they're gleaning. They're as the people are harvesting, they're picking up kind of the leftovers, the scraps, which is what the Old Testament law had commanded for them to be able to do. So they're going out and picking them up. She walks out into a field, has no idea whose field she's going into. Just so happens she's going into the field of this guy named Boaz. Again, Ruth has no idea whose field she's going into. But I think God did. And God had led her to the field of Boaz, who was a kinsman. He was a close relative of theirs. Things go really well for her, and then Naomi says to Ruth, "I need to find a home for you, a protector." Boaz is the best guy. And they set up in Ruth chapter 3, what we read last week. And so now, the whole story has to work out. Because Boaz said to Ruth, "Man, I would love to marry you. I would love to take this responsibility. There's only one problem. There's a guy who is a closer relative." And that's important, that he was a closer relative, because this other guy is the one who has the right. And so the first point for us is that the Redeemer had to be a near kinsman. He had to be from the same family. It was essential that he's from the same family and as close as he can be, because it would keep that land within the family. And for us as Americans, land is important, but it doesn't have near the importance that the land had for the people of Israel. You know, for us, land, my parents' land, I love being able to go out there. You know, I love to go out and to walk into the house that I grew up in. It has a lot of emotional attachments to me. But I'll be honest with you. When my parents pass away, I'm not living on that house. I'm not living there. I don't want to have to mess with 10 acres. I'm going to sell it unless my sister wants to buy it. It does not have the attachment that it does for the people of Israel, because for the people of Israel, the land was promised to them by God. And if you give up the land, in essence, you're giving up on God. And so for the people of Israel, it is so important to keep that land within the family, to make sure that it stays within the family. And that is why they had to if they did not have a son who the land would go to, they married within the family to make sure that the land stayed within the family. So he goes to the city gate. The city gate is the place where legal transactions were done. You might say it was City Hall. It was the courthouse. You went to the city gate if you had a legal transaction. And so Boaz goes, and he goes to the city gate. And the text gives us a picture that he knows when this other guy is going to be going out. Most likely he's going out to his land. People in Israel, they don't live out where they farm. They live within small villages or towns, and then they would go outside the gates and they would go out to their farms. And so he knows about what time the guy's going out. He goes there, he waits. As the guy's coming out, he stops him, and he says, "Hey, come over here." And he starts to go through, and you notice as he talks about it, at first he says nothing about Ruth. All he talks about is the land. He doesn't say anything about, hey, you have to marry Ruth if you buy the land. He just says, they're selling the land. You are the person that has the first right to take it, because it is your responsibility. This passage, this kinsman redeemer who has to be of a close family, it points us to Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. It says this: "Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death." We're going to come back and we're going to talk about this at the very end of the sermon today. But it is this idea that somebody has paid the price for us. Because of her situation, Ruth is powerless. In their society, a woman did not have the ability to provide for herself. You can talk about feminism all you want. We're not talking about 21st century America. Okay? We're talking about the land of Israel during this time period. The women had no rights to be able to secure the land. They had to have somebody who would be a protector, a provider, a guardian. You and I are kind of the same way. When it comes to ultimate, eternal realities, you and I do not have the power to take care of the things that have to be taken care of. There's somebody that has served as our kinsman redeemer and has purchased that ability. In verse 4 of chapter 4 of Ruth, it goes on. And the man that Boaz says, I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it. And the guy says, I will redeem it. He wants it. He wants the land. The Redeemer had to be willing to redeem. That nearest relative, he agrees, yes, I'll buy back the land. Now probably what he sees is the land. And he sees Elimelech, Ruth's father-in-law, had no sons. All he's got is this foreigner daughter-in-law who we can just send back home. And so Elimelech, this man who is buying the land, all he's looking at is, this is an opportunity to increase my holdings. This, for him, has nothing to do with anybody else. He is not looking at this as an opportunity to help someone in need. It is very simple. I can increase what I have. He is showing his greed. But then in verse 5, Boaz drops the hammer on him. He says, "Then Boaz said, 'On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth, the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property.' At this, the guardian redeemer said, 'Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it.'" I said he showed his greed right there. He shows his greed in outstanding colors. Wait. You mean this land really isn't going to be mine? Because that's really what it comes down to. If he marries Ruth and has children with Ruth, then this land that he is going to be paying money for all of a sudden doesn't belong to him anymore, because it belongs to whatever children come out of that relationship. And so he says, "I can't do it." He gives some high-sounding deal of, well, it might endanger my estate. I have no idea how it would endanger his estate, but it basically comes down to this. He does not want the trouble of taking on another family. He simply does not want the trouble of taking on another family. This isn't a concern about lack of material resources. He's not concerned that they may not have the money to provide for this family. That's not his worry. He is going to have to expend his own resources to do good for somebody else. And he's not willing to do it. And there is a lesson for us. Are we willing to expend our resources to assist those who cannot help themselves? Are we willing to be givers of what God has given to us to help and to assist those that are in need? Well, this kinsman redeemer is not willing to. He simply says, "I can't do it." And he makes up a great excuse. And we're good at making excuses, aren't we? We can make excuses all day. But he makes up a good one. "Well, it might endanger my inheritance, my estate." That's garbage. It's not going to endanger anything. All it's going to do is it's going to cost him. And he's not willing to pay the price. Verse 7 says this. "Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel." We'll explain that in just a minute. "So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, 'Buy it yourself.' And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, 'Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. That I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." The Redeemer had to legally transact this redemption before witnesses. Now that first verse, talking about with Israel, the man would remove his sandal and give it to him. You know, you probably read that and you go, why on earth does it explain this? Well, because by the time Ruth had actually been written down, that had already become kind of an archaic idea. That it was not something that was still practiced. And so they are describing, the guy who actually put the story of Ruth on paper is describing something. So when people read about this other man taking his sandal off and giving it to Boaz, the people who are reading it are now understanding, oh, okay, that's what they did. It was part of their ritual, part of the way to legally transact business. This is very side note. To me, that tells us a little bit about the historicity of this passage. This story is history. It happened. If it didn't happen, why on earth would you make up some crazy thing about taking my sandal off and giving it to somebody else if it didn't happen? But the fact that they have put this in says to me that this is a story that is true. It is a story that occurred in real life. Folks, that is the difference in our scriptures and so many other religions' book of faith. We can look at our scriptures and say there is factual evidence that what we read in our Bible actually happened. so they have given us this ritual. And why did they do it? It probably came from the idea of setting foot on land meant that you were taking possession of it. The idea being that because you have come onto the land, that you have stood on that land, that you now have the right to eventually take possession of it. And so the sandal would be the representative of, I have the right to control this land, and now I'm giving that right to you. And Boaz also called on witnesses to confirm the transaction. He itemized exactly what he's redeeming. You notice that he goes through and he says, here are the things that I am buying right now. And why does he do it? Boaz doesn't do this so that Boaz can become wealthier. Boaz recognizes that he gets nothing out of this. Financially, this is going to be a loss to him. You may go, Grant, he's getting land. You grow crops on land. You make money off of land. Yes, that's true. But you notice what Boaz says? I'm redeeming this for the descendants that are going to come. This is not going to my family. This is going to help somebody else. And it is going so that the name of Elimelech will not be lost to Israel. And for him, that is what was important. The selflessness that he exhibits is amazing. The selflessness that Jesus Christ exhibited for us is even more amazing. You and I are sinners. You and I, the Bible tells us, are enslaved to sin. Because of our sin, because of our rebellion against God, we now belong to somebody else. And we had to be purchased back. And God the Father sent his Son Jesus to buy us back, to pay the price. Jesus paid the price. Well, what did Jesus get out of it? Yes, ultimately he gets glory. But at the time, Jesus really didn't get much. Jesus he had to leave heaven. He had to leave paradise. He had to leave perfection. He had to come and to live on this earth. And you may go, Grant, this earth isn't that bad. Well, not for us. But if you compare it to heaven, this place is hell. And so Jesus gave up all of that. He gave up everything. He gave up all power. Jesus is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And he's born into a poor family. And he lives in this dusty backwater of the world. Why? Because he loved us. And he was willing to pay the price. He lives on this earth for 33 years. And he dies a death that we can't hardly describe because of his brutality. And he does it because he loves us. He gives himself for you and I. And Boaz pictures that for us. He demonstrates the selflessness of Jesus Christ. In verses 11 and 12, the story continues on. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Though through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah. The people prayed for Ruth to be fruitful. The people that they pray for, the people that are named, they praying for Boaz. And obviously that prayer has been answered. Why? Because we're still talking about Boaz thousands of years later. They prayed for the future family. Perez had been one who had settled in Bethlehem. And they prayed for Ruth to be fruitful. We're going to read in a few minutes about the answer to that. But they prayed, may she bear many children. We only read of her bearing one son. But that one son becomes incredibly important. And the Redeemer filled his promise in verse 13. It says, "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son." Can you imagine Ruth waiting? She knows Boaz is going to go to the gate. She knows Boaz is going to try to take care of these things so that she would be taken care of. But she also knows that there's this other guy that might have the ability, that has the ability to buy the land and to take her. And Ruth is thinking, I'm getting married today. I just don't know who. I mean, can you imagine that? Ladies, can you imagine? You got the wedding set up. You got the church decorated. You're standing at the back here ready to walk in. And as you're looking in, you're kind of peeking around going, who's the guy standing up there? Do I get the guy that I really want? Or do I get stuck with somebody else? I mean, imagine the fear, the dread that she has, but also this incredible hope that what she's going to get is what she really hopes for. And then Boaz comes back and says, it's all taken care of. And the joy in her heart. And then the child comes. And here we're just told she has a son. Doesn't give us any idea of who this son is and what he's going to become. It just says that she has a son. Well, then we read on in this story. And it says, the women say it to Naomi. Isn't it interesting? They don't say this to Ruth. They say these things to Naomi. Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son. And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Isn't it amazing? Ruth all of a sudden is out of the picture. Ruth, the one that has the baby, now all of a sudden the women are saying to her mother-in-law, God has given you a son. I'm sure Ruth for a minute is going, well, wait a second. God didn't give her nothing. He gave that to me. What about me? Man, that is what is so amazing about Ruth. There's no indication here that Ruth is upset about this. Ruth loves her mother-in-law so much that when her son is born, and she knows that this son is going to be adopted basically by Naomi, that he's going to carry on the family name, Ruth is rejoicing because her mother-in-law is happy. This is the climax of the entire story. You notice that it is focused on the child. The name Obed is servant. That he is going to be one who is going to serve his people. And the women offer up a prophetic prayer. They pray for this child to be something special. And we go, okay, great, this child will be something special. It's a little bitty town in the middle of nowhere. There's really nothing about this city, Bethlehem, that would make you think that a child born to an old man and a foreign woman is going to become anything. But he does. He becomes the grandfather of the man we call King David. And that's important. But that's not the end of the story for us. Because David becomes the ancestor of the most important baby to ever be born in the history of mankind. The baby by which we date everything. BC, AD, before Jesus, and in the year of our Lord. Her grandson, her great, however many grandsons, becomes the one who is the Redeemer of all mankind. This story, this great, beautiful love story, is important because it points us to the birth of Jesus the Messiah. Is Jesus for all of us? Yes, he is. You look at the women listed in the genealogy of Jesus. One of the few women that are listed is Ruth the Moabite, a foreign woman listed in the genealogy, in which most of the mothers are not even listed. It tells us that God had a plan, and he worked his plan. Even in the midst of a famine, the midst of a father and two sons dying, in the midst of him taking his family outside the promised land, he goes to this godless foreign country. Even in the midst of that, God is at work in leading us to this baby. Not the baby Obed, but the baby Jesus. And Boaz is the one who is willing to pay the price so that baby can be born. That is why I say that he is a picture for us of Jesus. He pictures, he shows us what it means to be willing to sacrifice, to give up for others. Boaz gives things up. He gives up some of his wealth. He gives up some of his reputation, some of his prestige to take this on. And he takes on a new family, knowing that this son who's going to be born will not be called the son of Boaz. He'll be called the son of Elimelech, the son of Mahlon. And then he raises this boy and teaches him. And that child will bear fruit to bless the entire world. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself, your material blessings, your happiness to bring blessings on others? Boaz is willing to do it. Because Boaz was willing to do that, we have the story of Jesus, the story of King David, the promises made to him, and we have the story of hope for every one of us. Jesus came to this earth, the great-great-great-grandson, however many you had to put in there, grandson of Ruth. And he gave his life for you and I. He paid the price so that we could be freed from our slavery to sin. Have you ever accepted that gift? Have you ever come to the place in your life where you recognize that, yes, I am a slave to sin? That I cannot do what I need to do. Paul says that the things that I want to do, I don't do. You come to that point where you recognize that you cannot please God in your own life. Because you cannot please God, you need the gift that he offers to you. And that is the gift of eternal life. If you've never accepted that gift, do so today. Look at the story of Boaz, willing to sacrifice, who pictures for us our God, who is willing to pay the price for you and I. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, thank you for loving us enough that you sent your Son Jesus to pay the price for my sin. And Father, I do not deserve it, but I can only say thank you. Thank you for being willing to give your Son so that I might have eternal life. As Jesus himself said in John 10, he came that we might have life and have it more abundantly. Father, I thank you that we have a life that isn't a life of scraping by forever, but it is a life of blessing, and it is going to be a life of plenty. Thank you for giving that to us.